Hey y'all, Melissa here with you today, and today we're going to be talking about something I consider an essential sewing notion, a seam ripper. Somebody emailed me recently with a question about seam rippers, and I looked on my site and couldn't believe that I didn't already have a post dealing with how to correctly use a seam ripper and why you might need one. So today I'm going to be showing you how to do that, including a trick that I have found that even a lot of people who've been sewing for a long time don't realize. Okay, here I have some fabric that I sewed together, just a regular 1/2 inch seam here. And here I have my favorite seam ripper. Now this is kind of a fancy ergonomically designed one, but all seam rippers are gonna work basically the same. So, if we look here, you can see the little stitches. And one way you can use a seam ripper is to take the pointy end and you can pick stitches out one by one just like that. Okay, that works if you only need to get rid of a few stitches. If you need to take out an entire seam, I have found that it works better to go and pull your seam, put some tension on it, and then use that pointy end of the seam ripper to take out threads this way, and then you can kind of pull. And then here's a tip that not a lot of people know. This little red ball on the end of a seam ripper is so that you can put your seam ripper in this way and just keep tension on the seam. It's hard to do this with the camera in between me and what I'm doing. Keep tension on the seam and you poke the seam ripper through there this way, and it'll rip more stitches faster, and it keeps this sharp pointy edge out so that that doesn't dig into the fabric and create holes. Okay, now you don't really want to do this method using the ball on some more delicate fabrics. So here I have some silk that I've sewn together, and I'm going to pick out a couple of stitches here. Okay, and if I wanted to seam rip this whole silk, I would probably go slowly and use my pointy end to get under the stitches. And then there's a razor in that curve of the seam ripper, so that'll cut the stitches, and then you can gently pull. Takes a little more time, but you can be more careful this way. I would not try to do it this way on silk. I have done that. It is too easy to accidentally run the razor off and cut the seam where you're not intending to. And in fact, since this is just a scrap, I will show you. Okay, you can already see it cut a hole there in my silk doing it that way. So that is why I do not recommend turning your seam ripper over if you've got really delicate fabric. It does work pretty well though on heavier weight fabrics to turn it over and push it through the seam, and you're not going to get holes the same way I did on the silk. Now, one of the reasons I like this particular seam ripper is because the end of it is this sticky rubber, and what it's meant to do, use it kind of like an eraser, and it helps you pull up the threads that get left on the fabric after you seam rip. In fact, the cap can also be used that way for this. Like, you can use it, and it depends on your fabric which one works better. Generally, I prefer the rubbery eraser end. This end is kind of like harder plastic, so it doesn't work as well for me sometimes, but that helps you pull out the extra stitching, and then you can see on these thicker fabrics, you can't really, it's hard to see where you stitched. So that is how you use a seam ripper to take out sewing mistakes or to remove basting stitches, say like when you inserted a zipper and you have to sew that seam together to put the zipper in. I have added a link below to this particular seam ripper, but again, this is not the only one you can use. It's just my personal favorite. And if you liked the tips in this video, I've got a playlist with more tips that you might find useful and helpful.